Reldon Keyes. Reldon Keyes, born in 1914, was a multifaceted individual known for his talents as an American poet, painter, novelist, short story writer, and filmmaker, among other things. Despite his achievements and varied interests, very little is known about his life, and the mystery surrounding his case remains unresolved to this day. Given that the events took place 65 years ago, the chances of uncovering new information are slim, yet the case still holds intrigue and is worth covering. Keyes is considered an important mid-20th century poet. His work is still being studied in schools today. His work has been immensely influential on subsequent generations of poets writing in English. Keyes was very frustrated that his work could not do as well as he hoped it would. He admitted to his friends that sometimes he felt like disappearing. On July 1919, at the age of 55, Reldon Keyes' car was discovered abandoned on the Marion County side of the Golden Gate Bridge. The circumstances surrounding his disappearance remain unclear, leaving several possibilities open. It's uncertain whether he chose to run away and start a new life, or if he decided to end his life suddenly. The unanswered questions about his fate add to the mystery that continues to surround his case. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. Moving on to the next case. Patricia and Howell. Patricia and Howell Jacobs, a 36-year-old woman, was found in the Natchez River in Port Arthur, Texas, on October 6, 1988. She had been last seen the night before at the Silver Spur nightclub in Silsbee, Texas. A month after her body was discovered, her driver's license and other personal belongings were found under a bridge near Kuntz, Texas. Investigators linked Daniel Andrew McGinnis to Patricia's case after 2 prior incidents involving women, but they lacked sufficient evidence to charge him in her death. The investigation into her murder would continue as authorities worked to uncover more information. Then in 2018, Patricia's family reached out to the Texas Rangers' Unsolved Crimes Investigation Program. This program was created in 2001 by the Texas legislature to provide Texas law enforcement agencies with a process for investigating unsolved cold cases or what appear to be serial or linked criminal transactions. The Rangers believed further investigation was needed and officially reopened the case in October of 2018. Through the new investigation, clothing that had never been DNA tested and other items were identified and the evidence was submitted to the Houston DPS Crime Lab. The new DNA evidence, collected from the clothing, was then entered into the combined DNA index system. Recently, investigators learned that a match was made. DNA found on the clothing belonged to Daniel Andrew McGinnis. After an interview and confirmation of the DNA evidence, he was arrested and charged in Jefferson County, Texas. His trial took place in September of 2022. On September 20th, he pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 20 years, which will run concurrently with the previous 199-year sentence in Tyler County. Moving on to the next case. Kristen Denise Smart. Kristen Denise Smart was born on February 20, 1977, in Augsburg, Germany, to parents Stan and Denise Smart, both of whom were teachers. Kristen had 1 sister and 1 brother, and the family later moved to the United States during her early years. Kristen was raised in Stockton, California, and later attended California Polytechnic State University. On May 25, 1996, Kristen attended a fellow student's birthday party. Around 2 a.m., she was found passed out on a neighbor's lawn by 2 other students, Cheryl Anderson and Tim Davis. They helped Kristen to her feet and decided to walk her back to her nearby dorm. Another student, Paul Flores, joined the group and offered to help them get Kristen to her dorm safely. At one point, Tim Davis left the group because he left off campus and had driven there. Shortly after, Cheryl Anderson also left. She told Paul Flores that he can take Kristen since Kristen lived close to his dorm. That meant that Paul Flores and Kristen was now alone. This was the last known sighting of her. She did not have any money or credit cards on her when she went missing. The university police department originally believed that Kristen went on an unannounced vacation. This meant that it would take a few days before she was even reported missing. Once the investigation finally got started, the police looked into Paul Flores since he was the last person to have seen her. There was actually substantial evidence that Paul Flores was responsible for Kristen's disappearance. An earring belonging to Kristen was found by a tenant who lived at a former residence of Paul Flores's mom. Between 1996 and 2007, the police searched the properties owned by the Flores family, but found nothing. Then on September 6, 2016, officials from the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Office announced they were investigating a new lead in the case. They then excavated an area near the campus Kristen attended. After 3 days, items of interest were found. These items were then analyzed to see whether they are connected to her disappearance. The items are still being investigated at the time of the making of this video. On January 29, 2020, the police department confirmed that 2 trucks owned by Paul Flores had been taken in as evidence. On April 22 this year, the Los Angeles Times reported that a search warrant was served at the home of Paul Flores in San Pedro, California. It was been reported that numerous items of interest were successfully found during the search at his house. That is all we know right now. Some good did come from this case at least. With Kristen's disappearance taking place on a campus and the campus police taking so long, it resulted in a Kristen Smart Campus Security Act. This law mandates that all public colleges and publicly funded educational institutions establish agreements with local law enforcement to ensure the reporting of cases related to violence against students, including those involving missing students. Moving on to the next case. Judith Bellow. Judith Bellow, a 28-year-old wife and mother of 2, disappeared in 1993 under mysterious circumstances in Stanwood, Washington. She had been due to pick up her son from daycare but never showed up. Her car was later found abandoned at the Stanwood post office, with no signs of where she had gone or what had happened to her. The police quickly feared foul play, as there were no clues in the car or nearby to suggest what had happened to Judith. Her sudden and unexplained disappearance left her family and the community devastated. Judith was close to her siblings, and they didn't believe that she would just leave everyone behind. The police had no leads and the case went cold. That would be until 2011. In 2011, the Snohomish County Sheriff's Department received a call from a woman claiming to be Judith Bellow. She told him that she just saw herself on a deck of cards about missing persons cases. She wanted to make sure that they did not need to look for her, and her case was now solved. The police had to make sure that it was the real Judith Bellow. They learned that she was now living in California. After some investigating, they were able to confirm that she was indeed the missing woman. Judith then called some of her family members to tell them she was alive and did not need to worry about her. She gave him a reason she disappeared. Judith wanted to get away from her abusive husband. She now had a new husband, and they had 3 children of her own. Her family was just glad she is safe and was happy to hear news that she also had 3 sons. Judith claimed she was scared to contact her family because of her first husband and what he might do to her siblings. She'd have spent Thanksgiving and Christmas with her family, and is now making up for lost time. Moving on to the next case. Julia Hernandez Santiago. On October 10, 1987, a passerby discovered a woman's body on a hillside near Estrella del Mar Road in San Diego. The victim had been assaulted and strangled. She was identified as 26-year-old Julia Hernandez Santiago. Despite collecting several key pieces of evidence, investigators were unable to identify any suspects, and the case went cold. However, in June 2020, police announced the arrest of a man in connection with Julia's murder. The police said 54-year-old James Charles Kingery emerged as a suspect after he was arrested in March for unrelated charges. When he was arrested, he had to supply a DNA sample. Then in May, the crime lab notified the police that James' DNA matched DNA taken from Julia's body. The investigators then followed new leads, cross-checked all the information until they were certain that James Charles Kingery is responsible. Moving on to the next case. Harold and Aquila Degree. Harold and Aquila Degree's lives seemed to be full of love and devotion to their family and faith. Their strong family bond, however, would soon be tested by a series of events that would change their lives forever. The power outage on the evening of February 13, 2000, following a nearby car accident, added an eerie layer of uncertainty to an already tense situation. Asha, who was likely already preparing for bed or winding down for the night, would have been affected by the sudden loss of power. The quiet that followed, compounded by the darkened surroundings, set the stage for the events that unfolded soon after. A power came back on during Harold then went to check on the children and saw them both sleeping. Just before he went to bed at 2:30 a.m., he again checked on the children and they were still asleep in their beds. After that, O'Brien heard Aisha's bed squeak. He assumed she merely changed her position, so he went back to sleep. He was wrong. Aisha got out of bed. She then took a book bag and folded it with clothes and personal items and left the house. Between 3:45 a.m. and 4:15 a.m., a trucker and a motorist saw her walking along Highway 18. Asha was wearing a long-sleeve white t-shirt and white pants. A motorist turned around his vehicle because he figured it was strange for a little girl to be walking around at that hour. He saw Asha run into the woods by the roadside and then disappear. It was raining and it looked like a storm was coming. Aquila awoke at 4:45 a.m. to get her children ready. She was in a good mood. It was Valentine's Day and also her wedding anniversary. When she opened children's room at 6:30 a.m., she noticed that O'Brien was in his bed, but Asia wasn't in hers. She looked for her throughout the house and even in the family cars, but still no sign of Asia. Aquila then told Harold. He suggested that maybe Asia went across the street to his mother's house. Aquila then called but was told Asia isn't there. That is when panic set in and the police was called. At 6:40 a.m., police arrived at her house. They had police dogs but the dogs could not pick up her scent outside. Aquila went through the neighborhood yelling Aisha's name. By 7 a.m., everyone was awake and looking for Aya. Local news also arrived on the scene and thanks to them, a trucker and a motorist came forward telling police what they saw. The police now knew what direction Asha headed in, but still couldn't find her. At the end of the day, there was still no sign of her. The next day, candy wrappers were found in a shed at a nearby business along the highway. Along with them were a pencil, a marker and a Mickey Mouse-shaped hair bow. It was confirmed that these items belonged to Asia. Also that day, Aquila found that Asia's favorite clothing was missing from her room. That is how they knew that Asia must have packed clothes and some personal items in her book bag. After a week, the search for Asia was called off. 9,000 man-hours was invested into searching for her. The police also followed up on every single lead. Missing person posters were put up in the entire area. Her belief was that Aisha ran away, especially since she packed the things herself. On the other hand, it is not typical for a 9-year-old to run away though. There was also no reason for her to run away. She did not have a dysfunctional family, and she did well in school. A month after Asia disappeared, the family went on the Montel Williams show to call attention to the case. America's Most Wanted and the Oprah Winfrey Show also devoted segments to it. Despite all efforts, no one had any idea what happened to Asha. Aquila got really frustrated. She said publicly that people aren't doing enough, and she believes it is because Asia is black and not white. About a year and a half on August 3, 2001, Asia's book bag and other items were discovered during a construction project of Highway 18 in Burke County near Morganton. It was found 26 miles or 42 kilometers from Shelby where the family lived. All of the things were wrapped in a plastic bag. The FBI took it in for more forensic analysis. The results from this test still haven't been made public. Asia's family saw tries to keep the case in the media. In 2008, Asha's family established a scholarship in her honor to support a deserving local student, and they also organize an annual walk to raise awareness and funds for the continued search. Alongside this, they display photos of what Asha looked like at the time of her disappearance, as well as updated images depicting what she might look like now. In May 2016, the FBI announced a potential new lead, stating that Asha might have been seen getting into a dark green early 1970s Lincoln Continental. While Belize initially seemed like a promising lead, it has yet to yield any results. Despite the challenges, Asha's family holds on to the hope that one day she will walk through the door, and they will be reunited. Moving on to the next case. Jeri Maayan. Jeri Maayan was born on August 14, 1976, in Saxonburg, Pennsylvania, to her single mother, Janice. She attended Winfield Elementary School, where she was known to be bright, popular, and cheerful. On February 22, 1985, Jeri got off the school bus around 4:10 p.m. with a few of her friends, who were then picked up by one of their parents. This left Jeri to walk the last 150 yards to her home alone. She was last seen walking past the 1970s Dodge van with a distinctive mural painted on the side. At the time of her disappearance, she was only 8 years old. When she did not arrive home, her family got worried. They noticed tire impressions about 50 yards from the home, but no sign of Jeri. The police launched an extensive search for Jeri, but found nothing. They believed someone would spot the van, but no one did. All of her friends and family members were ruled out as suspects. In 2014, investigators were told about a woman living in Michigan and was adopted who might be Jeri. After DNA testing, it was confirmed neither, but she was not. There have never really been any suspect, or any real leads pointing the police in any direction. The case is still unsolved. Moving on to the next case. Edith Patton. Emerson School in Sanford, Maine, had been a staple of the community for over 100 years, serving generations of students who grew up running through its playground, playing sports, and creating memories. However, by 2017, the property was sold to make way for a new Cumberland Farms gas station and convenience store. As the old school was being replaced, no one knew that something much darker lay hidden beneath the ground, undisturbed for decades. The soil that once carried the laughter and joy of children now held secrets that had remained buried for far too long. On May 4, 2017, as construction workers were digging for a water line on the site of the former Emerson School, they made a chilling discovery: a collapsed casket. As they continued to dig, human remains were uncovered, including finger bones, a jawbone, teeth, and ribs. The site, located so close to the school, raised unsettling questions. Who would bury someone so near to a place where children had played for generations? Though the pelvic bone was missing, making it difficult to determine the gender with certainty, medical examiners speculated that the remains belonged to a 10-year-old female child. The discovery shocked the community, who were left grappling with the eerie implications of this long-forgotten burial. Officers discovered the remnants of a beautiful antique wooden casket, along with several nickel-plated handles and the keys to the coffin. Initially, Major Matt Gaunier from the Sanford Police Department treated the area as a potential crime scene. However, it was later confirmed to be an old gravesite. This wasn't the first time Sanford residents had encountered ancient remains. In the 1980s, while digging for an elevator shaft at the town hall, workers unearthed a leg bone, which was later determined to be very old. Experts confirmed that the casket found in 2017 dated back to the Victorian era, meaning the body was over 100 years old, adding another layer of mystery to the discovery. Upon discovering something so unique and mysterious, the construction of the gas station was halted. Then came the meticulous task of carefully excavating the grave. The city manager at the time, Stephen Buck, was accompanied by the construction workers' foreman, Peter Smith, as he sifted through the dirt carefully by hand. They were also joined by Paul Auger, who was a teacher as well as a local historian, a member of the Sanford Springvale Historical Society's board of directors. Auger was an enthusiast, and as soon as the coffin was discovered, he declared the site to be an historical excavation. The mayor at the time granted an extension for the excavation to ensure all the invaluable pieces of evidence were properly recovered. His son, Andrew Auger, played a key role in carefully handling the delicate artifacts, taking great care not to damage anything as the materials had become fragile over time. Every shard of glass, piece of metal, and bone was meticulously documented as it was removed from the dirt and mud. One notable feature of the coffin was a single-pane glass window on the top, which was typical of Victorian-era caskets, according to the Sanford Springvale Historical Society. The roots of a nearby oak tree seemed to frame the coffin, their tendrils intertwining with the casket, adding an eerie and almost fairy tale-like quality to the scene. They labeled each bone, each artifact such as the 2 coffin keys and a piece of gingham cloth. A gingham cloth is a sort of plaid check cloth probably once belonging to a dress. Before reburying the remnants of the coffin, officials felt it was only appropriate to identify the person who was laid to rest there. Some of the proceeds from the sale of Emerson's school were used to finance the DNA tests that would be conducted in an attempt to give a name to the deceased. Paul Auger was a high school history teacher, and his students volunteered to help with the identification process. With more hands on deck, the process did not get any easier. The state medical examiner's office had no use for identifying the remains, but Paul Auger championed the cause. Mayor Tom Coate prioritized the digging in the local city council's agenda, and the council approved funding. Later on, Mayor Becky Brink would continue to support the cause. The excavation process was lengthy. Paul and his son, Andrew, looked for more bones with a special sifter that the owner of a nearby Shaw's hardware store customized for this purpose. They were able to find parts of a skull, pieces of vertebrae, ribs, and a mandible with teeth. Teeth typically help identify victims easily, but back then, there were no dental records. Still, it is good for DNA evidence. Dirt and root hairs that covered the bones were cleaned with soft, bristled toothbrushes and chopsticks, and washed gently with water. After the cleaning, the human remains were laid out on an examination table at the Carl Heald and Black Funeral Home. By this point, it became public knowledge that the school grounds had previously been Woodlawn Cemetery, as could be seen in photos, maps, and documents 1889. Thomas Goodall was the founder of Goodall Mills in the 1860s, who owned the Goodall Mansion across the street. Emerson School, formerly Sanford's High School, was constructed adjacent to the cemetery. The town began relocating graves out of the cemetery around 1900 to make space for the Emerson School, which was built in 1901 and opened to students in 1902. When Willard School was erected in the 1920s, it transitioned to become a high school, while Emerson assumed the role of an elementary school. Sometime in the early 1900s, due to neglect and changing climate, the graves were deteriorating, so they were relocated to Oakdale Cemetery, creating space for a playground at Emerson School. According to the city records, 77 bodies were exhumed on record and reburied at Oakdale. The site was clear enough by 1933 for Emerson School to purchase the grounds. The front page from Sanford Tribune, an advocate newspaper, of September 17, 1971 ran a headline that read, "300 Emerson schoolchildren cheer as Woodlawn Cemetery is converted into playground by town officials." Paul Auger could recall stories of kids bragging about how they used gravestones as third base for baseball, except they were not just stories. While the remains were laid out at Carl Heald and Black Funeral Home, they could only deduce they were the bones of a little girl. But it took 6 long years to identify the Woodlawn Cemetery Doe, as she was dubbed. Initial DNA tests only confirmed the medical examiner's observation. The bones belonged to a woman, but not a little girl as they had initially assumed. The teeth of the deceased would hopefully provide enough DNA signatures to identify the family this person belonged to. Major Gagney helped upload a genetic profile to the public database known back then as GEDmatch. Years passed, and finally, Paul Auger contacted the DNA Doe Project in the spring of 2022. The DNA Doe Project helped identify nameless bodies in an attempt to lay the deceased to rest with consent from their loved ones, possibly solving mysteries or reuniting relatives with the bodies of their own kin. Jennifer Randolph of the DNA Doe Project became actively involved in the search for the missing link. This speeded up the entire process. They handed the DNA samples to Parabon Nano Labs. Parabon Nano Labs in Virginia had recently started a forensic genealogy wing, which was relatively new at the time. There were many matches, but most of them were inconclusive. Finally, through bioinformatics, the lab's investigative genetic genealogists were able to identify the nameless body by building a family tree from her great-great-niece and nephew. There were 3 promising leads: a paternal half-great-great-niece, a paternal half-great-great-nephew, and a maternal third cousin 3 times removed. Linking together their family and putting up a family tree, the DNA Doe project was able to trace the daughters of Ferdinand and Lois Patton. The real puzzle piece that helped figure it all out was the obituary of one Edith Patton in the Biddeford Daily Journal on November 12, 1891, and that is when it all fell into place. Ferdinand and Lois Patton were residents of Fairfield in Somerset County in the state of Maine as recorded by an 1870 census. It listed down 2 of their daughters, 3-year-old Edith and 2-month-old Elfrida, born in 1867. Edith spent her toddler years in Fairfield. By 1872, her brother, Lindley, was born as well. In the 1880 census, 13-year-old Edith was employed as a live-in housekeeper in Lewiston, while her father worked at a sawmill. Court records revealed that Lois and Ferdinand Patton divorced after an accusation of adultery in October of 1880. Ferdinand Patton got married again twice. His second wife was Emma Dinsmore, whom he married in October of 1880. Possibly right after his divorce, she passed away soon after their marriage, leading to a third marriage. He married his third wife in 1884, Agnes Avery, who bore him 3 sons. The couple had a daughter in 1899 in Chelmsford, Massachusetts. Ferdinand named his daughter Edith May, which was possibly a tribute to the elder sister Edith. Neither Edith nor her full siblings ever married or had children. Her little brother, Lindley Patton, passed away in 1890, and her sister, Elfrida, in 1917. The Biddeford Daily Journal reported Edith's passing. The cause of her ultimate demise was consumption, tuberculosis, which was an epidemic in the 1800s, fatal for 1 in 7 people in the U.S. In 1891, Edith was only 24 years old when she lost her life. To quote the article, she was beloved by a wide circle of friends who sincerely mourned her untimely passing. She was loved enough to be laid to rest in a glass window coffin with nickel-plated handles, dressed in her best. Passing at a young age, Edith Patton did not have many papers to record her life. There is no record of when she moved to Springvale. Her parents also passed away within a few years of Edith losing her life. Nevertheless, Paul Auger deduced she could have been working at a shoe shop, as women commonly did at the time. Many graves in Woodlawn Cemetery had no gravestone or marker to identify the deceased. Many were in ruins because of the weather and time. Thanks to advancements in technology, 132 years after being left behind, Edith was now discovered, named, and laid to rest properly. She was identified on March 1, 2023 by the DNA Doe Project. Her identity was announced in a press conference held by the DNA Doe Project. Jennifer Randolph of the DNA Doe Project observed that there had been a larger turnout at the Sanford press conference than at a 2021 press conference that identified a victim of Chicago serial offender, John Wayne Gacy. Randolph mentioned that Edith's identification was a tribute to how caring people of Sanford were. She explained the advanced process that led to identifying Edith. This involved working with DNA in a database, analyzing strong matches, and examining various documents like censuses, newspapers, and diaries. While going through a local person's diary, Randolph found a crucial line: Edith Patton passed away today. This discovery boosted the investigation. Paul Auger found the confirming obituary at the MacArthur Library in Biddeford. The notice from November 25, 1891 in the Biddeford Journal mentioned Edith's friends, but omitted family details. According to Auger, none of Edith's family members were buried in Sanford. They were all laid to rest in the same cemetery in Auburn, Maine. The city of Sanford decided that Edith would be reburied alongside her family at Oak Hill Cemetery in Auburn, with a marker bearing her name. Thanks to advances in DNA technology, after 132 years of being laid to rest, Edith Patton was finally reunited with her family. This discovery brought an end to one of the biggest mysteries that had ever affected the town of Sanford. Moving on to the next case. Eve Wilkowitz. Eve Wilkowitz, a 20-year-old woman from Oakdale, Suffolk County, New York, was known for her vibrant, loving, and charming personality. She had a close relationship with her younger sister, Irene. The passing of their mother from breast cancer in 1976 had a profound impact on Eve and her sister. In 1980, Eve moved to Bay Shore, New York, to be closer to her job. Eve Wilkowitz worked as a secretary at Macmillan Publishing in Manhattan, New York City. In February 1980, she met Jack Dempsey, an aspiring writer, and the two quickly began dating. On the evening of March 21, 1980, Eve and Jack went to watch a movie together and returned to Jack's apartment sometime before midnight. Eve was extremely tired, so she decided to take a quick nap and asked her boyfriend to wake her up in time to catch the last Long Island Railroad train home. Her boyfriend asked her to stay the night, but Eve insisted that she needed to go back to her apartment, as she needed to take care of some personal work the next day. Jack woke her up and dropped her off at Penn Station in Manhattan. Eve took the last railroad train back to her home in Bay Shore. However, she never made it back to her home. 3 days later, on March 25, 1980, a woman discovered Eve's body near the train station in Bay Shore. An autopsy revealed that Eve Wilkowitz had been bound, sexually assaulted, and strangled with a rope. Authorities believed she had been held captive for 3 days before her death. Her body was discovered in the backyard of a house not far from her own home. Notably, her shoes, pocketbook, and coat were missing. The police conducted interviews with family and friends during their investigation. Her boyfriend was suspected but was quickly ruled out. Police questioned people around the crime scene, but no one had noticed anything suspicious. Police were able to collect DNA samples from the crime scene, and over the years the DNA was uploaded to various DNA databases, but no matches could be found. With no leads and no suspects, the case would eventually go cold. For years, Eve's younger sister, Irene Wilkowitz, had become the last advocate for Eve after her father died in 2010. Irene would regularly contact the detectives, hoping to keep the case alive and trying to find any updates. Then in 2018, Irene's son learned about the new investigative technique, genetic genealogy, used to catch the Golden State Killer. However, as the technique used private genealogy databases in order to find familial connections to identify the suspect, the technique had raised concerns for many due to the misuse of people's personal data. As a result, some states did not allow it to use. In January of 2019, Irene contacted police and asked them to use the technique in her sister's case, but was told that New York did not allow the use of this technique. But investigators were able to find a workaround. The FBI had investigated the case in 1980 and were under no such restrictions. The detectives sent the DNA from the semen sample collected from the crime scene to the FBI, and in July of 2021, with the help of genetic genealogy, they were able to find a distant relative. Soon, they narrowed it down to one suspect, Herbert Rice. However, they could not question him as he had already died. He had died in 1991 from cancer. Detectives then tracked down his son, who voluntarily gave a DNA sample. Detectives soon confirmed that Herbert Rice had been the killer. At the time of the murder, Herbert had lived close to the crime scene. His ex-wife told detectives that at the time of the murder, she had kicked Rice out of their marital home, and he had been living at his mother's house, which was a few houses away from the crime scene. At the time of the crime, Rice had 3 prior convictions for minor offenses, which did not mandate him to provide a DNA sample for the database. In March 2022, investigators exhumed Rice's body and collected a DNA sample, which was later conclusively confirmed as a match to the semen found at the crime scene 42 years earlier. This breakthrough led to the resolution of the case after nearly 5 decades. Moving on to the next case. Jennifer Pan. Jennifer Pan was the daughter of Vietnamese immigrants Bích and Han, who moved to Toronto, Canada, and embraced the strict parenting style known as tiger parenting. This approach, shaped by their cultural upbringing, focused on high expectations, rigid rules, and little emotional praise. Bích and Han were hardworking individuals, earning their living at an auto parts factory, and managed to purchase a large house and nice cars. They had a clear vision for their children's future, hoping they would mirror their success. Jennifer, along with her younger brother Felix, was pushed to meet these high standards, with her father insisting she excel at piano from the age of 4, among other demanding expectations. Jennifer Pan was a talented figure skater and flute player, but her father's stern and ever-watchful eye overshadowed her achievements, closely monitoring every practice. Under his strict rule, she was forbidden from dating, attending social events, or participating in typical teenage experiences. By 22, Jennifer had never been to a club, had a drink, or gone on vacation without her family. Despite her father's belief in the power of practice, Jennifer's academic performance didn't reflect the same dedication. She often forged straight-A report cards to cover up her real grades, which were typically C's and D's. By senior year, the pressure of maintaining this facade caught up with her when she failed a calculus class and had her early admission to Ryerson University revoked. Too embarrassed to admit the truth, Jennifer lied to her parents, claiming she had received multiple scholarships to attend the university for free. While her parents thought she was sitting in college classes, she was actually working at local cafes and as a private piano instructor. Jennifer kept up the lie so specifically that she even purchased used textbooks and watched videos related to her area of study. She then continued to deceive when she told her parents that she was accepted and given free tuition at a pharmacology program in the University of Toronto. She then got permission from them to live near the college during the week. In all actuality, though, she was staying with the boy, Daniel Wong, her secret high school lover. Her lies became too bold and too specific, however, when she told her parents that she was working as a volunteer at the well-known and world-renowned Toronto Hospital for Sick Children. Her parents started questioning her story and became suspicious when they noticed she did not have any sort of uniform or even a hospital ID badge. Wanting to know the truth, Jennifer's mother secretly followed her daughter into work and soon learned it was all a farce. Upon this realization, Jennifer's father wanted to kick her out of the house, but persuaded by Jennifer's mother, the girl who lied was allowed to stay. Throughout much turmoil and fighting, Jennifer's parents eventually learned that she had not even completed high school, but while they certainly weren't understanding, they did help and encourage her to take the necessary classes to get her high school diploma so that she could apply to actual universities. However, their forgiveness did not mean their kindness, and Jennifer was very much a prisoner in her own home, not allowed to contact her boyfriend under any circumstances. Resorting to secret telephone calls to Daniel, Jennifer soon became worried as Daniel was not as interested in her anymore due to her extreme social restrictions. Jennifer soon found out that he was dating another woman and that he was falling for that girl fast. To combat Daniel's straying eye, Jennifer concocted a story of a brutal break-in and subsequent attack. She also fabricated a story about a bullet being mailed to her from Wong's current girlfriend. Her fantastic stories seemed to be effective, and they all came to a head when Jennifer convinced Daniel to help her hire a professional hitman for $10,000 to kill her parents. She told Daniel that the death of her parents would lead her to inherit over $500,000 and that they could then move in together and live happily ever after. On November 8, 2010, Jennifer, after successfully putting the hit out on her parents, left the door to the family home unlocked before going to bed. Under the cover of darkness, 3 hitmen entered the large home and demanded all of the money in the house from Jennifer's parents. They then took Jennifer's parents to the basement where they were each shot several times. Jennifer's brother was luckily not living with his parents by then. Jennifer's mother was killed, but Jennifer's father would shockingly survive the attack. The 3 men fled, having taken many of the home's valuables as well as $2,000 cash from Jennifer herself. During the attack, Jennifer claimed she was tied up but that she was able to overcome her bondage and call 911. The investigation quickly focused on Jennifer as a suspect, as she was the only one unscathed. Detectives noted that the situation was unusual for a home invasion, as it was uncommon for intruders to attempt to kill 2 people but leave 1 eyewitness unharmed. A computer analysis of Jennifer's police statement also revealed discrepancies, further raising suspicion. Once her father, Han, was interviewed by police, his account differed significantly from Jennifer's version of events. As the investigation unraveled, it became clear that Jennifer, along with her boyfriend Daniel and the 3 hitmen, had orchestrated the attack. All involved were arrested and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 25 years. Moving on to the next case. Marissa and Shiverella. Marissa and Shiverella, a 9-year-old girl from Hazleton, Pennsylvania, lived with her parents. On March 18, 1964, she left her home alone at around 8 p.m. to go to school. A 3rd grader at St. Joseph's Parochial School, which was only a 10-minute walk from her home, Marissa usually walked with her siblings. However, on this day, she decided to go alone to arrive early and deliver cans of pears and beets to her teacher for her teacher's feast day. However, Marissa never made it to school. She was last seen alive at around 8:10 a.m. walking east on West 4th Street. Later that day, around 1 p.m., a man giving his 16-year-old nephew driving lessons near an abandoned strip mine noticed what seemed to be a large doll on top of a garbage pile. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was the body of a small girl. He immediately contacted the police to report the discovery. The body was later confirmed to be Marissa and Shiverella. Her body had been found 2 miles away from her home. Her hands and feet had been tied with her own shoelaces. An autopsy revealed she had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. Her clothes and the canned foods were found at the crime scene. Police questioned family and friends. They also interviewed a priest who had been suspected in a murder of another girl in Bristol, Pennsylvania, and a local exhibitionist who committed suicide shortly after he was asked to give a polygraph test. Police interviewed numerous suspects over the years, but none were ever charged. The case would eventually go cold. In 2007, DNA sample found at the crime scene was submitted to the Pennsylvania State Laboratory, and a suspect's DNA profile was made. The DNA profile was entered into Cody's, but no matches could be found. In 2018, with the help of Paraborn Nanolabs, a forensic sketch of the potential suspect was made using the DNA found at the crime scene. The photo showed how the suspect may have looked like at the age of 25, 40, 60. The police released the photos to the general public hoping to find any leads, but to no avail. Then in 2019, the DNA sample was entered into genealogy databases and found a match to a very distant relative of the suspect. However, the investigators had no idea about the suspect's identity. Then, in 2020, genealogist Eric Schubert, an 18-year-old college student, reached out to the police and offered his help free of charge. Eric had a special set of skills of drawing and tracing family trees to find matches. He had previously helped the police in several cases. The police agreed and Eric got to work. The next few months, Eric worked tirelessly and provided names of relatives who were scattered throughout the country. The police collected DNA from their relatives and matched it with the DNA found at the crime scene. Soon, they zeroed in on a local bartender named James Fort. However, they found out that Fort had died in 1980 at the age of 38. In January 2022, his body was exhumed and a DNA sample was taken. On February 3, 2022, a DNA test confirmed his DNA matched to the DNA found at the crime scene. At the time of the murder, Fort was 22 years old and lived 6 to 7 blocks away from Marissa. Fort worked as a bartender and bar supply salesman in Hazleton. He was never married and had no children. Ford was arrested for sexual assault in an unrelated crime in 1974, 10 years after Marissa's murder. However, he was offered a plea bargain for aggravated assault and sentenced to 1 year on probation. 4 years later, he was arrested again, this time charged with reckless endangerment and harassment, though police provided no further details on the arrest. Ford passed away in 1980 from natural causes, possibly a heart attack, while working at a bar. Marissa's siblings expressed their gratitude to the investigators and Eric for solving the case and bringing some closure to the family. Moving on to the next case. Deborah Lindley. Debbie Lindley, born in Bromley, southeast London, in 1962, was 26 years old when she became the victim of a shocking crime in 1988. a hotel manager in Edinburgh, Debbie returned to London to attend a hotel management course and stayed with her parents during her visit. She also visited her brother, Gordon, as she was set to be a bridesmaid at his upcoming wedding in 2 weeks. On Wednesday, March 23rd, Gordon dropped Debbie off at Petswood Station in the Bromley suburb of London, where she boarded the Orpington to London train. Debbie Lindley chose an isolated carriage, likely because smoking was permitted inside. This carriage had no connecting corridors to others, with exits only at either end, leading directly onto the platform or rails. At the time, these types of carriages were being phased out, and Debbie's tragic death prompted British Rail to reduce their use during off-peak hours. They also painted a red band on these isolated carriages to make them easier for passengers to identify. Shortly after the train left Brixton, a French au pair heard loud screams coming from the carriage, but she later admitted she was too frightened to intervene, remaining glued to her seat, with many criticizing her for not pulling the communication cord, which a passenger can pull to stop the train in an emergency. However, the au pair did see a red-haired man exit near Debbie's carriage, and she followed him across the station until she lost track of him. Other witnesses in the train station reported seeing several other different men, such as a scruffy man with dirty blonde hair who left the train at Penge East and a short, stocky man seen jumping from the train at Victoria. Out of around 70 people on board the train, the au pair is the only one to have relayed hearing anything specific, while some of the passengers reported hearing a commotion but did not investigate either. Online sleuths wonder if the carriages at either side of Debbie's were empty, which would give some reason as to why no one else heard her screams. By the time the train arrived to Victoria Station Platform 2, it was 12:50 p.m. As was common at the time, a British Rail porter walked through the train to check for left luggage and found the floor and seat of the carriage Debbie was in to be covered in blood. He was then treated to the horrifying scene of Debbie's body. She had been stabbed 11 times to the neck, face, and abdomen, and one of these lacerations had caused her death. Debbie had defensive wounds on her hands, and while no sexual interference was found, police proposed the idea that she'd been fighting off a sexual attack. None of her belongings were missing, which made the police rule out the robbery theory. The fact that she had been murdered in broad daylight on public transport prompted authorities to wonder if perhaps this wasn't a first attack for the killer. No murder weapon was located, but it is believed to have been a 5 to 7.5 inch long, heavy blade, high-quality kitchen knife. During the investigation of Debbie's murder in 1988, 1,200 witness statements were taken, and 650 individuals were questioned and ruled out. The case was featured on Crime Watch UK in April 1988. And it was also found that some of the killer's blood was mixed in with Debbie's, meaning that a DNA profile has now been built of the killer who was likely injured in the struggle. To this day, almost 60 out of the 70 passengers have been eliminated from the investigation. Debbie's mother passed away in 2013. While the rest of her family continued to search for answers and justice. Despite extensive investigations, no matches have been found to the killer's DNA, and Debbie's tragic murder remains unsolved. Moving on to the next case. Amina Khan. Amina Khan, a 6-year-old girl from Croydon, London, had a seemingly happy life with her father, 44-year-old Dr. Safraz Khan. She lived with him since birth and was described as an intelligent and well-loved child, surrounded by 15 cousins. However, despite the apparent joy in her life, Amina's family dynamic was not without its difficulties. The nature of her family struggles remains unclear, yet they hint at underlying challenges that may have played a role in the tragedy that unfolded later. Dr. Khan gained full custody of his only child following a divorce in 2008 from Amina's mother, 39-year-old Harma Fazal Karim Dar, who was also working as a doctor. The breakup between the pair was ugly and had resulted from a failed arranged marriage. Following a lengthy custody battle, Palmer was given the right to see her daughter 3 weekends of the month. But in 2011, Dr. Khan acted in good faith and let his daughter visit her mother for longer over the summer holidays. However, when Dr. Khan then went to pick up his daughter, he discovered that Tamina, Harma, and his ex-wife's car were missing from the home. When authorities were alerted, they theorized that Tamina had been taken in a spiteful gesture against her father, and that Harma had helped to carry out her plan. According to the Home Office, it was found that Harma had traveled to Pakistan via Abu Dhabi and that she and her daughter had left the UK on the April 11, 2012. In the years following Amina's disappearance, Dr. Khan has traveled to and from Pakistan numerous times in an attempt to locate his child. He has returned to the UK empty-handed each time. Prior to her disappearance, Amina did not have a passport. Dr. Khan believes his ex-wife fraudulently gained one for their 6-year-old daughter without his permission. And he strongly believes that Harma's family know where she and Amina are hiding out. He once took the family to court based on evidence that they knew the location of their whereabouts. But the case was later thrown out due to missing court documents, and it's unknown what this evidence was. UK courts have vowed that they will not give up in reuniting Dr. Khan with his missing daughter. He says of her, "It is my greatest fear. I'm really sorry you're feeling this way right now, but I can't provide the support that you need. It's important to talk to someone who can, like a close friend, family member, or a professional." Moving on to the next case. Brett Ryan. Brett Ryan, known as the Fake Beard Bandit, had a history of crime, including a series of bank robberies disguised as an elderly man to cover his $36,000 debt. During his sentencing, he claimed that a manic episode triggered by depression and a recent breakup led him to commit the robberies, which resulted in a relatively light sentence of 3 years and 9 months. In prison, he exhibited good behavior, and after his release on day parole, he was allowed to sleep at the prison while spending the rest of his time outside. Upon his full release, he became engaged to Kristen Baxter, a woman he had likely met during his time on day parole. He was upfront about his criminal past as a bank robber, but he told her he had changed. He said he was a college graduate and he had a good-paying job. He lied. His mother knew he was leading Kristen Baxter on and threatened to not only tell Kristen but also to withdraw her own financial support of Brett. With the wedding only weeks away, Brett decided to take extreme actions to avoid the truth coming out. With only 3 weeks until his wedding, Brett took matters into his own hands. Using the arrow from a crossbow he had stored in his mother's garage, he stabbed his mother in the chest and then proceeded to strangle her in her garage. His younger brother, Christopher, heard the struggle and came running. Aiming the crossbow at Christopher, Brett shot him in the neck with the arrow and then hid his body under a tarp along with their mother's body. Hearing the altercation, the eldest brother, Lee, came to investigate and was summarily attacked as well, but he managed to outrun Brett and took refuge at a neighboring house where he was able to call the police. In the meantime, Brett's older brother, Alexander, then came over for unrelated reasons and was promptly stabbed in the driveway by one of the crossbow's arrows. He was found lying in the driveway when police arrived. Brett tried to cover his tracks by creating an electronic footprint at his house miles away. He attached a wooden cooking spoon onto a string tied to the ceiling fan which would spin so that the spoon tapped the enter button on the keyboard of his laptop, prompting the playing of various YouTube videos. He also pre-programmed his email to send various messages from his home computer to make it appear as if he were home and not killing his entire family at their house. Brett Ryan's attempt at using a technological alibi failed, and he was arrested outside his mother's home. He was charged with first-degree murder for the death of his brother, Christopher, and second-degree murder for the killings of his mother and younger brother, Alexander. He also faced charges for the attempted murder of his older brother, Lee. Ultimately, Brett was convicted and received 3 concurrent life sentences, with a mandatory minimum of 25 years before he could apply for parole. As a result, his planned marriage to Kristen Baxter never took place. Moving on to the next case. Pamela Falcons. Pamela Falcons lived in Faulkner County, Arkansas, in 1990 and worked at a video store. On February 2nd, Pamela was the only clerk on duty at the Crossroads video store. Around 9 p.m., her husband, David Falcons, came to pick her up, but when he arrived, there was no sign of Pamela. Her handbag, keys and coat were in the store, but she was nowhere to be found. David reported her missing and a search party was soon looking for her. It was a cold and rainy night which made it difficult. The next day, 2 of Pamela's cousins made a grisly discovery off Clinton Mountain Road. At an old dump site, they found her lifeless body. She had been assaulted. The fatal injury had been a blow to the head. Male DNA was collected from her body. Investigators asked anyone with information to come forward. A young couple told police that they left the store at 8:40 p.m. just as a man was entering it. He was a tall, heavy-set white male in his 40s with a tattoo on his left arm. Someone eating at a wagon wheel restaurant next door to the video store claimed that he saw a vehicle there around the time of the abduction. It was described as a light blue Chevrolet with a white panel and white camper shell. Everybody within 100 miles was on the lookout but never saw it. By 2018, DNA technology had advanced to the point where forensic genealogists could search ancestral databases for matches to DNA samples found at crime scenes. Investigators believe that Edward Reininger, a truck driver who lived in Faulkner County at the time of Pamela Falcon's disappearance, was responsible for her death. He had been a frequent customer at the video store where Pamela worked and had a history of assaulting women, having served 10 months in prison in 1994. In 2002, Reininger passed away in Salt Lake City, Utah, from natural causes. However, investigators collected a DNA sample from his daughter, which was later confirmed to match the evidence, revealing that Edward Reininger was responsible for taking Pamela Falcon's life. Moving on to the next case. Mitchell Preston. In January 1998, the skeletal remains of an unidentified male were found by a state highway worker near a highway overpass in Vigo County, Indiana. The remains were determined to belong to a white male, aged between 40 and 60 years, and standing between 5 feet 8 inches and 6 feet 2 inches tall. The case details were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Person System, NAMUS, to help identify the man. The investigation remains ongoing, and any information related to this case could be pivotal in uncovering the individual's identity. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement investigators to identify the man, no matches were found. The case went cold due to a lack of viable leads. In April 2023, the Indiana State Police and Vigo County Coroner's Office worked together to submit forensic evidence to Othram. They wanted to determine if advanced DNA testing could help identify the man. Othram's scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the forensic evidence. They then used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the unknown man. Othram's in-house forensic genetic genealogy team then used this profile to conduct genealogy research. This provided new investigative leads to law enforcement. A follow-up investigation was conducted using the new leads. This led investigators to potential relatives of the man. Reference DNA samples for a potential relative were collected and compared to the DNA profile for the John Doe. This investigation led to the positive identification of the man in June 2024. He is now known to be 47-year-old Mitchell Preston. He was last seen in Anderson, Indiana in August of 1997. He was traveling on foot to California. While authorities are relieved to bring some closure to Preston's family, his case remains an open investigation. Anyone with information regarding Preston's disappearance, including his last known whereabouts or any details about what might have happened, is urged to contact the Indiana State Police, ISP, Cold Case Team and Trooper Detective Brad Miller at 1-800-225-8576. All tips will be thoroughly investigated, and anonymity is guaranteed. Moving on to the next case. Arturo Martinez Altomarino. For years, the case of Arturo Martinez Altomarino's death went cold after he was found in a desert area of Stanfield, Arizona on October 29, 2007. The body, discovered by hunters, was identified as 37-year-old Arturo, and witnesses quickly pointed to Oscar Tejeda Mejia as the prime suspect in the crime. However, Mejia was nowhere to be found. Despite efforts by authorities to track him down, he evaded capture, and the case went unsolved. It wasn't until later that new information or developments would bring attention back to the case. But for a long time, Arturo's family and investigators were left without answers. Then, in 2017, investigators learned that Oscar was living in Mexico. In 2018, a DNA sample was acquired with the help of a person close to Oscar. It was confirmed that he is responsible for what happened to Arturo. It took a few more years for investigators to get Oscar back to the United States. Finally, on January 12, 2022, 59-year-old Oscar was extradited to Arizona and booked into jail. Sheriff Mark Lamb said, "I am impressed by my detectives and their commitment to bring this suspect to justice. When political boundaries threatened to derail their progress, our guys and gals got creative." It is not known yet why Oscar took the life of Arturo. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.